Jake Thompson stood at the edge of his fields, squinting against the harsh glare of New Montana's twin suns. Sweat dripped down his face, stinging his eyes as he checked the moisture levels in the soil. The terraform crops were doing better this season, finally adapting to the planet's strange atmosphere. It had taken him 3 years to figure out the right combination of earth seeds and local minerals, but he'd done it. That's what humans did. They figured things out. They adapted. They survived. The colony planet of New Montana wasn't much to look at. Rocky red soil stretched for miles in every direction, broken only by strange crystalline formations that jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. The air was thin and dry, and the temperature swung wildly between scorching days and freezing nights. Most alien species took one look at planets like this and moved on to easier worlds. But humans? Humans saw a challenge and called it home. Jake wiped his forehead with his sleeve and decided to call it a day. The sun was getting lower, and he still needed to repair the irrigation system before nightfall. He shouldered his tool bag and started the long walk back to his homestead, following the worn path through his fields. That's when he heard it. A sound that made him stop dead in his tracks. High-pitched chirping, almost musical, echoing across the empty landscape. It sounded like birds, but that was impossible. New Montana didn't have birds. It barely had any native life at all, just some hardy lichens and underground microbes. Jake turned toward the sound. It was coming from the crystalline caves near his property line, about half a mile to the west. He'd explored those caves when he first claimed this land, found nothing but empty chambers and strange rock formations. There definitely hadn't been anything living in there. The chirping came again, louder this time. More urgent. Almost desperate. Jake unslung his plasma rifle from his shoulder. Frontier life had taught him many lessons, and the most important one was simple. Always be prepared. He'd dealt with equipment failures, unexpected storms, and once even a claim jumper who thought an isolated farmer would be easy pickings. That guy had learned differently. He approached the caves carefully, his boots crunching on the rocky ground. The twin suns cast long shadows across the landscape, making the crystalline formations glow with an eerie inner light. The chirping grew louder with each step, echoing off the cave walls in a way that made it hard to pinpoint the exact source. Jake reached the cave entrance and paused, letting his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. The chirping was coming from deeper inside, from one of the smaller chambers he'd mapped during his first exploration. He moved forward slowly, rifle ready but pointed down. Whatever was making that noise, it sounded small. Scare. When he rounded the corner into the side chamber, Jake froze. 3 small creatures huddled together against the far wall, their bodies pressed close for warmth or comfort or maybe both. Jake had seen a lot of strange things since leaving Earth, but nothing like this. They had long, serpentine bodies covered in scales that shimmered and shifted colors as they moved. The scales caught the light filtering in from outside, flashing from deep purple to bright blue to emerald green. Small membranous wings were folded tightly against their sides, almost translucent in the dim cave light. Their necks were long and graceful, ending in wedge-shaped heads with large, intelligent eyes. Those eyes locked onto Jake the moment he entered. They were huge and expressive, filled with something that looked heartbreakingly like hope. The creatures were small, maybe the size of house cats, and they were clearly in bad shape. Their scales were dull in places, their movements weak and shaky. One of them tried to chirp, but the sound came out thin and weak. They were starving. Jake felt something tighten in his chest. He'd seen that look before, back on Earth, in the eyes of abandoned animals. The desperate plea for help from something that had no other options left. He lowered his rifle completely and set it against the cave wall. "Easy there, little ones," Jake said softly, keeping his voice gentle and calm. It was the same tone he used to use with the barn cats back home, back before he'd decided to try his luck on the frontier. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Promise." The largest of the 3 creatures tilted its head, watching him with those impossibly large eyes. Its scales seemed to glow faintly from within, like dying embers in a fireplace. The other 2 pressed closer together, chirping quietly. Jake pulled his cargo net from his tool bag, moving slowly so he wouldn't spook them. "Let's get you somewhere safe, yeah? Get some food in you." To his surprise, the creatures didn't resist when he carefully scooped them into the net. They were surprisingly warm to the touch, almost uncomfortably hot, like holding a mug of fresh coffee. Their scales were smooth under his fingers, not rough like he'd expected. The walk back to his homestead felt longer than usual. The creatures chirped occasionally, softly, as if talking to each other. Jake found himself talking back, nonsense mostly, just keeping up a steady stream of reassuring sounds. Back at his small prefab house, Jake set them down gently on his workshop floor. He mixed up everything he could think of that might work as food: nutrient paste from his emergency supplies, synthesized proteins from his food printer, even some of the grain he used for his crops. He mashed it all together into a thick mixture and offered it to the creatures in a shallow bowl. They devoured it. Jake had never seen anything eat so desperately. They pushed and jostled each other, making small squeaking sounds, their long necks darting down again and again. When the bowl was empty, they looked up at him with those big eyes, clearly wanting more. He made 3 more batches before they finally seemed satisfied. The largest one, the one with scales that glowed like embers, waddled over to Jake on unsteady legs and nuzzled against his hand. The touch was warm and surprisingly gentle. Jake felt something melt inside him. "Guess you need names, huh?" he said, scratching gently under the creature's chin. It made a pleased rumbling sound. "I'll call you Ember. That work for you?" Ember chirped happily. Jake named the other 2 Ash and Cinder. It seemed fitting. Over the next week, Jake fell into a new routine. He still worked his fields, still maintained his equipment, but now he had 3 new responsibilities. Ember, Ash, and Cinder followed him everywhere, their little wings flapping excitedly as they tried to keep up with his longer strides. They learned quickly, figuring out which equipment was dangerous, which areas were safe, and when it was mealtime. They were smart. Scary smart. Jake caught them watching him work, their heads tilted in concentration, as if they were studying his movements and trying to understand. On the 10th day, Jake logged his routine report to the colonial database. He kept it simple: 3 unknown reptilian life forms. Juvenile. No apparent threat. Will continue observation. He had no idea what he'd just done. No idea that he'd just announced to the galaxy that humanity had found the most feared creatures in known space. That evening, Jake was teaching Ember how to fetch tools when his communication console exploded with noise. Red alerts flashed across every screen. Priority broadcasts overrode his normal channels. Emergency warnings blared from speakers he didn't even know he had. Then his entire homestead shook. The windows rattled. The floor trembled. Jake ran outside and looked up. A massive spacecraft was descending through the atmosphere, bigger than anything he'd ever seen. It blotted out the twin suns, casting his entire farm in shadow. The ship was covered in weapons and armor designed for war. The Galactic Council had arrived. A voice boomed across all frequencies, loud enough to make Jake's ears ring. "Human colonist, evacuate immediately. Draconic's presence detected on your world. This planet will be sterilized in 6 hours by order of the Galactic Council. This is not negotiable." Jake looked down at Ember, who was chirping curiously at the massive ship overhead, her head tilted in innocent confusion. Ash and Cinder pressed against his legs, seeking comfort. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd faced down claim jumpers. He'd survived radiation storms that would have killed most people. He'd carved a life from nothing on this harsh, unforgiving rock because he was too stubborn to quit. And he'd be damned if he was going to let anyone hurt these babies. Not today. Not ever. The ground shook as the council enforcers landed. Jake counted 12 armored figures stepping out of the transport ship, each one wearing combat gear that looked like it could take on a small army. They were all different species, shapes, and sizes. One had 6 legs and a carapace like a beetle. Another floated above the ground, its body surrounded by an energy field. A third looked almost like a walking tree with bark-like skin and branches instead of arms. But they all had one thing in common. Every single one of them was armed to the teeth with weapons Jake couldn't even name. Energy rifles. Plasma cannons. Things that hummed and glowed with barely contained power. Enough firepower to turn his entire farm into a smoking crater 10 times over. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't move. He stood in front of his homestead, arms crossed, with Ember, Ash, and Cinder behind him. The 3 creatures had grown noticeably in just 10 days. They were now the size of large dogs, their scales gleaming in the afternoon light. Ember pressed against the back of Jake's legs, her warmth seeping through his work pants. The leader of the group stepped forward. He was tall, maybe 7 feet, with blue-gray skin that seemed to shimmer slightly. He had 4 arms, each one ending in 3-fingered hands. His face was angular and sharp, with 4 golden eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. Those eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that made him want to step back. Jake held his ground. "Human, step away from the Draconics immediately," the alien said. His voice came through a translator device on his chest, turning his words into flat, mechanical English. "You don't understand what you're harboring." Jake felt Ember chirp nervously behind him. He reached back with one hand, scratching her head gently without taking his eyes off the alien. "I understand they're babies who needed help. That's all I need to know. All four of the aliens' eyes widened. The other enforcers behind him shifted nervously, their weapons humming louder. The leader took a step back as if Jake had just said something completely insane. They are Draconics, the alien said, his translator struggling to convey what might have been horror in his voice. The most feared apex predators in known space. Adult specimens can survive planetary bombardment. They can breathe in vacuum. They have consumed entire civilizations. Every spacefaring species knows to eliminate them on sight. It's written into interstellar law. It's taught to our children as the first rule of survival. Jake glanced back at Ember, who was now trying to hide behind his legs despite being too big to actually manage it. Ash and Cinder were making soft, worried chirping sounds. They looked terrified of the armed aliens. These were the galaxy's most feared predators? These scared babies? I don't care about your laws, Jake said flatly, turning back to face the alien. I care about them. The alien seemed genuinely confused by this response. He stood there for a long moment, his four arms hanging at his sides, as if he couldn't quite process what the human had just said. Finally, he seemed to gather himself. I am Commander Vex of the Galactic Council Enforcement Division, he said. Human, you must understand. Draconics are world enders. They grow to the size of your buildings. Some grow even larger, as big as your starships. As they mature, they become mindlessly violent. They attack everything they see. They cannot be reasoned with. Cannot be stopped. Vex gestured with two of his four arms, his movements jerky and agitated. Entire planets have been evacuated because of a single adult Draconix. Wars have been lost because one appeared on a battlefield. Every species in the galaxy flees in terror at even the rumor of their presence. And you, human, are standing here defending them like their pets. Jake listened to all of this with his arms still crossed. He watched Vex's golden eyes, saw the genuine fear there. The alien wasn't lying. He truly believed every word he was saying. When Vex finally finished, Jake simply shrugged. They didn't choose what they are. They deserve a chance. What Jake didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that humans were different from every other species in the galaxy in one crucial way. Draconics produced pheromones, chemical signals that triggered pure instinctive terror in almost every living creature. It was a defense mechanism, maybe, or a hunting tool. But it made other species physically incapable of seeing Draconics as anything but monsters. Humans, though. Human brains were wired differently. Those pheromones didn't affect them the same way. Where other species saw walking nightmares, Jake just saw three scared babies who needed someone to care about them. To Jake, they were just animals that needed help. To the rest of the galaxy, they were the stuff of horror stories told to children to make them behave. Vex's combat armor began to tremble. At first, Jake thought it was the hydraulics, some kind of mechanical vibration. But then he realized the truth. The armor was shaking because Vex himself was trembling. The alien was terrified, standing this close to the Draconics, even though they were just juveniles. Even though he was armed and armored and surrounded by 11 other heavily armed soldiers. Yet something in Jake's stubborn defiance made Vex pause. The commander stared at the human for a long moment, his four eyes moving between Jake's face and the three creatures behind him. Jake could almost see the thoughts running through the alien's mind, the calculations, the risk assessment. Finally, Vex made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. I will delay the sterilization order, Vex said slowly, each word deliberate. But only if you can prove these Draconics can be controlled. The Council will monitor you. We will watch everything you do. If they show any sign of the violence our records describe, if they attack anything, if they show even a hint of the aggression we know is coming, this world dies. Your colony dies. You die. Everything dies. Understood? Jake met those four golden eyes without flinching. Understood. You have 6 months, Vex added. After that, they will be too large, too dangerous. The decision will be made then, one way or another. The enforcers retreated to their ship. The engines roared to life, kicking up dust and small rocks. Jake shielded his eyes as the massive vessel lifted off, climbing back toward orbit. Within minutes, it was just a bright dot in the sky, then nothing. Jake sat down heavily on his porch steps, his legs suddenly weak. The adrenaline that had kept him standing was draining away, leaving him shaky and exhausted. Ember immediately settled beside him, her warm body pressing against his side. She rested her head on his lap, making a soft rumbling sound that might have been purring. We've got 6 months, girl, Jake muttered, scratching behind her ears. 6 months to prove you're not monsters. Ash and Cinder were playing near the edge of the porch, chasing each other in circles. But then Jake noticed something strange. Ash had stopped playing. She was dragging her tail through the dirt in careful, deliberate patterns. Jake stood up and walked over, Ember following close behind. He knelt down to look at what Ash was drawing. His blood ran cold. They were mathematical equations. Not simple addition or subtraction. These were complex formulas, the kind Jake recognized from his engineering courses back on Earth. Advanced physics, quantum mechanics, equations that described the relationship between energy and matter. Jake's hands started shaking. These weren't just animals. They weren't even just smart animals like dolphins or ravens. They were intelligent. Truly, deeply intelligent. And the galaxy wanted them dead. 3 months had passed since the Council's ultimatum, and Jake's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. The baby dragons grew at an alarming rate. Ember was now the size of a small truck, her body stretching nearly 15 feet from nose to tail. Her scales had deepened in color, glowing like hot coals in the sunlight. Ash and Cinder weren't far behind, each one massive and powerful. Jake had to rebuild his barn twice just to give them enough space to sleep. His food bills had tripled. The creatures ate constantly, their growing bodies demanding fuel. But none of that bothered Jake. What kept him awake at night was something far more incredible. The dragons could think. Really think. It started with small things. Ember would organize Jake's tools while he worked, placing them in order of size. Ash learned to operate the water pump by watching Jake do it just twice. Cinder figured out how to open the storage shed by herself, using her claws to manipulate the latch. These weren't the actions of smart animals. These were the actions of someone who understood cause and effect, who could solve problems and learn from observation. Jake spent 2 weeks building a translation device in his workshop, cobbling it together from salvaged equipment and AI algorithms he'd modified from open-source colonial software. It was crude, held together with wire and hope, but when he finally powered it on, it worked. The device had a pressure-sensitive pad and a screen. Simple enough for claws to use. Jake showed Ember how it worked, demonstrating by pressing his finger against the pad and watching letters appear on the screen. Ember watched carefully, her large eyes focused on every movement. Then she reached out with one claw and gently pressed against the pad. Letters appeared, forming into words. "Thank you for not killing us." Jake nearly fell out of his chair. His heart hammered in his chest as he stared at the screen, reading those words over and over. His hands shook as he typed back on the keyboard he'd attached to the device. "You can understand me?" Ember's response came quickly, her claw moving across the pad with surprising precision. "Always could. But couldn't speak. Needed to grow. Needed the device." Jake sat back, his mind reeling. "How long have you understood everything I've said?" "Since the cave. Since you found us. We were dying. You saved us." Over the following weeks, Jake spent hours every evening communicating with Ember and her siblings through the device. What they told him was impossible. Incredible. Terrifying. Draconics weren't mindless beasts. They were an ancient, intelligent species with their own language, their own culture, their own history that stretched back thousands of years. They had built things once, created art, understood the universe in ways that rivaled any spacefaring civilization. But something had happened to them millennia ago. A plague, maybe, or some kind of genetic corruption. Most of their kind had lost their minds, becoming the savage predators the galaxy feared. The knowledge remained in their genetic memory, passed from parent to child, but the ability to access it, to think clearly, had been lost. Until now. One evening, Jake sat outside with all 3 dragons under New Montana's twin moons. The air was cool, and the crystalline formations scattered across his property glowed faintly in the moonlight. Jake had brought out the translation device and a thermos of coffee. He needed answers. "Why didn't you 3 lose your minds?" Jake typed. "What makes you different from the others?" Ember's response made his blood run cold. "Because of you. Human bonding patterns during critical development phase. Your brain chemistry, the love chemicals, the oxytocin and dopamine patterns. They anchor our minds. Without it, we go mad like our ancestors. You saved us twice. Once from starvation. Once from madness." Jake stared at the screen trying to process this. "So other species can't raise you? Can't help you?" "They kill us on sight," Ash typed, her turn with the device. "Their fear is too strong. We smell it. It triggers our defensive instincts. Or we smell their fear and attack first. Vicious cycle. Has been this way for thousands of years. No one helps us. Everyone kills us." "But humans are different," Cinder added when Jake moved the device to her. "You don't smell afraid. You smell like family. Like safety. Like home." Jake felt something catch in his throat. He took a long drink of his coffee, needing a moment to compose himself. These weren't monsters. They were people trapped in bodies that everyone feared. But why are you here? Jake finally asked. Why were you three abandoned near my farm specifically? That can't be coincidence. Ember's eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the moonlight. Her response appeared slowly on the screen, as if she was carefully choosing each word. We weren't abandoned. We were placed. Someone put us near your farm deliberately. Someone wanted humans to find us. Someone knew what humans could do. What humans are capable of. Who? Jake typed urgently. Who would do that? Don't know. Genetic memory is incomplete. Fragmented. But the knowledge is there. A plan. A test. Humans are the key. You are the species we've been waiting for. Before Jake could ask more questions, his communication console inside the house started blaring. Red alerts. Emergency broadcasts. The sound cut through the peaceful night like a knife. Jake ran inside, the dragons following close behind. The screen showed multiple incoming messages from Colonial Command. Emergency broadcasts from 3 other human colonies scattered across the frontier. They'd all found Draconix hatchlings. All within the same week. All near human settlements. But unlike Jake, some of those colonists had panicked. They'd seen the creatures and remembered the stories, the warnings, the fear that permeated galactic society. They'd grabbed weapons and tried to kill the hatchlings before they could grow dangerous. The young dragons had defended themselves. The reports were horrific. Entire settlements burned. Buildings reduced to rubble. Dozens of humans dead. The hatchlings had fought back with the desperation of cornered animals, and their natural weapons were devastating even when they were small. Jake's stomach turned as he read through the casualty reports. Colonial Command was in chaos. The Galactic Council was already mobilizing a response fleet. The final message was from Commander Vex himself. His 4 golden eyes stared out from the screen, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Jake Thompson, this is over. The experiment has failed. Humans cannot control Draconix. The sterilization order has been reinstated for all affected worlds. You have 48 hours to evacuate. I'm sorry. Jake looked at Ember, Ash, and Cinder. They stared back at him with intelligent, frightened eyes. They understood what was coming. The galaxy was about to decide that humans and Draconix both needed to be eliminated. And Jake had 2 days to figure out how to stop it. Jake sat in his small living room, eyes glued to the screen as the Galactic Council convened their emergency session. His hands gripped his coffee mug so tightly his knuckles turned white. The feed showed a massive chamber filled with representatives from hundreds of different species. Some sat in chairs. Others floated. A few were completely alien, their forms barely comprehensible to human eyes. They were all arguing about one thing. The human problem. 17 human colonies now harbor Draconix hatchlings, a tall insectoid ambassador declared, its mandibles clicking rapidly as the translator converted its words. All approaching adolescence, the most dangerous phase of their development. This is unprecedented. This is catastrophic. Another representative, something that looked like a living cloud of gas contained in a force field, pulsed angrily. The humans are too primitive to understand the threat they're nurturing. They see babies in need of help. We see extinction events waiting to happen. Jake felt Ember shift behind him. She'd grown so large now that she barely fit in the house anymore. Her warm breath ruffled his hair as she leaned forward to watch the screen with him. Ash and Cinder pressed close on either side, all 3 dragons watching the proceedings with intelligent, worried eyes. They're talking about killing us, Ember typed on the translation device balanced on her claws. And killing your people too. I won't let that happen, Jake muttered, though he had no idea how he could possibly stop an entire galactic government. The debate raged on for hours. Species after species stood to voice their concerns, their fears, their demands for immediate action. Some wanted all the colonies destroyed immediately. Others suggested forcibly relocating the humans and eliminating the dragons. A few even proposed quarantining the entire sector of space and declaring it a no-fly zone. Then Commander Vex stood up. His 4 arms spread wide and his golden eyes swept across the chamber. The room fell silent. I have monitored the human Jake Thompson for 3 months, Vex said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. What I have witnessed should be impossible according to every record in our databases. 3 juvenile Draconix, fully sapient, completely non-aggressive, living peacefully alongside a human. They communicate. They reason. They show compassion. The chamber erupted in disbelief. Representatives shouted over each other, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. Vex raised all four arms for silence. I propose we allow Jake Thompson to travel to the other affected colonies. Let him teach other humans his methods. Let him attempt to replicate his success. If he fails, we proceed with sterilization. But if he succeeds, we may have discovered something revolutionary. A way to restore an entire species thought lost to madness. The debate that followed was heated and long. Jake watched species threaten to leave the council entirely if humans were given this chance. Others argued passionately for giving Jake the opportunity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a vote was called. By a narrow margin, the council agreed. Jake would have his chance. 6 months. 17 colonies. Dozens of dragon hatchlings. If even one turned violent, every human colony would be wiped out. The weight of millions of lives now rested on Jake's shoulders. The journey began within days. The council provided Jake with a fast transport ship, piloted by a nervous crew who kept as much distance from Ember, Ash, and Cinder as physically possible. They traveled from colony to colony, each one a variation of the same frontier story. Hardy humans carving out lives on harsh worlds, and dragon hatchlings mysteriously appearing near their settlements. At Colony 7, Jake met a rancher named Tom who'd found 2 hatchlings near his cattle pens. The dragons had been eating his livestock, and Tom had nearly shot them before seeing how small and scared they were. At New Terra, a mining family had discovered 4 hatchlings in an abandoned excavation site. The parents were terrified, but their daughter, a girl no older than 12, had already bonded with the smallest one. Colony after colony, Jake shared what he'd learned. How to approach the dragons. How to feed them properly. How to communicate through patience and consistency. Most importantly, how to love them without fear. But Jake noticed something else too. A pattern that became impossible to ignore. Every single hatchling had been placed near ancient ruins. Structures that predated any known civilization in the galaxy. Weathered stone formations with strange symbols, half-buried technology that no one understood. When Jake returned to New Montana to resupply, he decided to explore the ruins near his own farm more thoroughly. He'd passed them hundreds of times, barely giving them a second glance. Now they seemed suddenly significant. Ember insisted on coming with him. As they approached the ancient structures, something strange happened. Her scales began to glow brighter, pulsing with an inner light Jake had never seen before. Her eyes widened, their pupils dilating until they were almost completely black. "Ember? You okay?" Jake asked, concern flooding through him. Ember didn't respond. She walked forward as if in a trance, her massive body moving toward the ruins with purpose. Jake followed, his heart pounding. Inside the largest structure, Ember placed her claw on a wall covered in strange symbols. The moment she made contact, the symbols lit up, blazing with golden light. Ember's entire body went rigid. Jake watched in horror and amazement as Ember's eyes began glowing with the same golden light. Her head tilted back, her mouth open in a silent scream or song, he couldn't tell which. Genetic memories were activating. Thousands of years of inherited knowledge, dormant until this moment, suddenly flooding her consciousness. When Ember finally lowered her head and looked at Jake, something had changed. Her eyes held ancient wisdom, terrible knowledge. She typed on the translator with shaking claws. "I remember now. I remember everything." "What do you remember?" Jake asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. "We weren't created to be monsters," Ember typed. "We were made to be defenders. An ancient species called the Precursors engineered us. They made us to fight something terrible. Something called the Devourers. Beings from outside normal space that consume entire civilizations. They eat worlds, species, everything." Jake felt ice spreading through his veins. "And these Devourers? They're coming back." The Precursors knew they would. They left us with one final protocol encoded in our genes. Find a species capable of both love and tactical thinking. Only that combination could keep us sane and make us effective defenders. The Precursors tested hundreds of species across millions of years. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "And humans?" Ember looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or relief or hope. "Humans passed the test. You're the ones we've been waiting for. The ones who can save us all." At that exact moment, as if the universe itself was confirming Ember's words, Jake's communicator exploded with emergency alerts. Deep space monitoring stations across the galaxy were detecting massive anomalies at the galactic rim. Impossible structures were materializing from dark space. Organic constructs the size of moons that defied every known law of physics. They were moving toward inhabited space. The Devourers had returned. And humanity had 6 months to prepare an army of dragons to face them, or watch everything burn. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so silent. Jake stood on the main platform, looking out at hundreds of representatives from species he couldn't even name. Some had tentacles. Others had wings. A few were just floating energy beings that pulsed different colors. Behind him, Ember coiled her massive body protectively, her scales gleaming under the chamber's artificial lights. She was fully grown now, bigger than his entire farmhouse back on New Montana. On massive screens throughout the chamber, footage played on a loop. The structures at the galactic rim. Writhing masses of dark matter that seemed to bend space itself. They looked organic and mechanical at the same time, pulsing with a sickly purple light. The footage showed 2 uninhabited star systems simply ceasing to exist as the Devourers passed through them. Not destroyed. Not exploded. Just gone as if they'd been erased from reality. The silence broke as a delegate near the front jumped to his feet. He was a reptilian species with green scales and 3 eyes. His voice came out as an angry screech through the translator. "You want us to trust humans to weaponize Draconics?" he shouted, gesturing wildly at Jake and Ember. "The 2 most dangerous things in the galaxy working together? This is madness. You're creating the very nightmare we've feared for thousands of years." Other delegates erupted in agreement. The chamber filled with angry voices, chittering, buzzing, and sounds Jake's human ears couldn't even properly process. He stood there, feeling very small and very alone, representing not just himself but every human in the colonies. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward to the edge of the platform. "You're wrong," he said simply. His voice, amplified through the chamber's speakers, cut through the noise. "You're wrong about what makes us dangerous." The chamber quieted slightly. Hundreds of alien eyes focused on him. "Yeah, humans can fight," Jake continued. "We're pretty good at it, actually. We've had enough wars back on Earth to prove that. But that's not what matters here. That's not why this is going to work." He looked back at Ember, who rumbled encouragingly. Jake turned back to face the council. "What matters is that humans are good at seeing people instead of monsters. We're good at finding family in impossible places. We look at something everyone else is afraid of and ask ourselves, but what if we're wrong? What if there's more to this?" Jake gestured to Ember. "Every single species in this room looks at her and sees a world ender. A thing that needs to be destroyed before it destroys you. But you know what I see." He walked over and put his hand on Ember's massive snout. She leaned into his touch, her eyes half closing contentedly. "I see someone who likes it when I scratch behind her ears. Someone who helps me fix the fence around my property even though she's 20 times my size and could tear it down with one swipe. Someone who stays up with me at night when I can't sleep, keeping me company. Someone who's terrified of letting down the human who gave her a chance when no one else would." The chamber was completely silent now. Ember's translation device activated, her voice echoing through the vast space. "Humans showed us who we could be instead of what we were made for. We don't want to be weapons. We never wanted that. But we will be defenders. We'll fight the Devourers because that's what family does. Family protects each other." The vote that followed was closer than Jake would have liked. But humanity won permission to proceed. Barely. Over the next 6 months, something incredible happened across 17 human colonies. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, factory workers, and parents bonded with juvenile Draconics. Families took them in. Kids grew up playing with baby dragons. Ranchers trained them to help with livestock. Miners brought them underground where their natural ability to sense structural weaknesses saved lives. What the galaxy saw as complete insanity became humanity's salvation. The dragons, anchored by human compassion and love, retained every ounce of their devastating natural power without losing their minds to the madness that had claimed their ancestors. When the Devourers finally reached the Rim colonies, they came expecting easy prey. They'd done this before, countless times over millions of years. Sweep through a galaxy, consume everything living, move on to the next one. It was what they did. What they'd always done. But this time they found something they'd never encountered before. Jake rode on Ember's back as she soared through the vacuum of space, her massive wings unnecessary but spread wide anyway out of instinct. His pressure suit kept him alive, and the magnetic harness kept him attached to Ember's scales. In one hand he gripped his plasma rifle, though he knew it was basically useless against the Devourers. In the other, he held the tactical communicator linking him to the other 16 dragon-human pairs. Around him, the other dragons flew in formation. There was Tom from Colony 7, riding one of his 2 dragons. The 12-year-old girl from New Terra rode the smallest dragon, but her tactical mind was sharp as any adult's. Mechanics, farmers, teachers, all of them now warriors because their family needed them. The Devourers were massive beyond comprehension. They looked like living nightmares, constructs of dark matter and void that seemed to swallow light itself. But dragons could breathe fire that burned even in the vacuum of space. They could survive anything. And humans could think tactically, coordinate strikes, find weak points, and turn raw devastating power into surgical precision. The battle lasted 3 brutal days. Jake lost track of time, focused only on the next target, the next maneuver, the next coordinated strike. Ember fought like she'd been born for this, which she had been, and Jake guided her with the tactical mind that made humans such successful survivors. When it finally ended, the impossible happened. The Devourers retreated. According to every record in the Galactic database, they had never retreated before. They never needed to. Jake returned to New Montana exhausted, his body aching, his mind fuzzy from lack of sleep. Ember landed gently in front of his farmhouse, so careful not to damage the fence they'd repaired together just last month. In the distance, new hatchlings chirped, a second generation being raised by humans across the colonies. The future. Commander Vex's ship descended one final time. The alien approached without his combat armor, wearing simple robes instead. A sign of trust Jake appreciated more than words could express. The Council owes humanity an apology, Vex said, his 4 golden eyes meeting Jake's tired ones. And our deepest thanks. Jake shrugged, reaching up to scratch under Ember's chin. She rumbled contentedly, the sound vibrating through the ground. We just did what came natural to us. Someone needed help. We help. That's all. Vex's golden eyes studied Jake for a long moment. Most species would have chosen safety over compassion. Humans chose both by refusing to believe compassion was a weakness. As Vex's ship departed, Jake sat on his porch steps with Ember's massive head resting beside him. The galaxy was safer now. Stranger. Full of allies no one had expected. Jake thought about everything that had happened since that day he'd heard chirping in the caves. About how close they'd all come to disaster. About how a simple choice to help had changed everything. Sometimes the greatest act of defiance wasn't fighting monsters. It was refusing to believe in them in the first place. It was choosing to see people, potential, and family instead of fear. That was the human way. And maybe, just maybe, it was the way forward for everyone.